What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here with you, giving our best bets for Week 14 of the NFL season. John, we came away with a positive mark. Both of us did in Week 13, 2-1. We each were with our picks. The props ended up being profitable. I do need to eat crow, however, on the Commanders-Titans game, which I felt so good about. I was like, man, I know we maybe are walking into a trap here. We might be buying high on Tennessee, but man, that Titans run defense, no. All that went out the window. They were down 28-0 early in the second quarter. Maybe my worst call of the year. So I needed to get out in front of that narrative. But nevertheless, we will take a 4-2 week overall. I know you went down with the Bengals as well. I was with you on that pick. It felt like all year, the Bengals have been so close to getting that one win that could maybe turn the season around. And after yet another loss where they score at least 33 points, 4 times now this season they have lost when scoring at least 33. That felt like the final nail in the coffin.
I think so. So fortunately, with Black Friday and Cyber Monday going on, there's some good deals out there, or were earlier this week. So I went ahead, ordered myself a shock collar that will go off anytime that I consider picking the Bengals on this podcast. It won't prevent me from using them in other various betting interests. I don't know if I can get away with that, but I think for the purposes of this podcast, I will no longer be talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. I owe it to everyone else, or else I will be, dosed a pretty decent jolt.
Smart move, smart purchase by you. I may need to do the same when it comes to the Tennessee Titans. But let's get right into it, John. Like we do every week, we each pick 3 games we want to discuss. We give you out a pick on those games. We always let you lead it off. We're not changing that now. Where are you taking us first? Okay.
I will start us off with the Bears versus 49ers game. And I'm wondering to myself as I look at the line, like, is this a donkey bet? Because the 49ers are an absolute free fall and everyone knows it. And of course, like, the Bears are not a good team. They just fired their coach, everything like that. But how do you trust the Niners with points at this stage of the season? I just don't really understand it. And this isn't even a bet on like the proverbial dead cat bounce that comes after a team fires its coach. Although it can't be understated that the Bears are a team that really might benefit from Eberflus being gone. But the Bears have just played better of late. I mean, they've lost their 3 games by 1 score in each of them, ranging from 1 to 7 points. The offense has scored at least 20 points in each of those 3 games, 363 yards per game on offense. If you extrapolated that over the whole season, that would rank 8th in the league. Defense hasn't been playing well, but with the way that the 49ers offense is functioning or dysfunctioning at this point, I'm not sure that they're the unit that really makes the Bears pay for it. So the Bears getting points, getting more than a field goal here. I love this spot for Chicago.
I'm not going to tell you otherwise, John. I know trusting the Bears has been, it's been difficult. They've been better against the spread than they have been straight up of late. I was impressed with how they rallied back, though, against Detroit on Thanksgiving Day. I mean, that was one of the worst first halves that any team has played all year. That was as lopsided as it gets. And the Gibbs fumble just before the half, you knew it was going to be big. It certainly was, as far as letting Chicago back into that game. And I think you're right. I think we could see an unprecedented second post-firing dead cat bounce from the Chicago Bears. When we saw it, like the offense immediately changed as soon as they let go of Shane Waldron. I think everybody in that building was done with Matt Eberflus. I would not be surprised if they rally around Thomas Brown this week. So I like that call. And by the way, Nick Bosa, Trent Williams, both yet to practice this week. And both of those huge pieces, I would say at least one of those guys are trending toward not playing this week. And the Niners could be going to a 3rd straight game without 2 of their best players. I'm going to start us out, John, with what may also be a bit of a donkey bet, but I don't care. I'm walking into the fire. I am taking the Philadelphia Eagles to cover 12.5 at home against the Carolina Panthers. Philly's won 8 in a row. They're 8-4 against the number on the year. This is the first time all year, though, that they have been favored by double digits. Jalen Hurts, like most quarterbacks, hasn't been great in this spot throughout his career. 2-5 ATS as a double-digit favorite. We don't care. This is a catastrophic mismatch in the trenches, catastrophic mismatch defensively for the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, Carolina's made a lot of progress offensively over the last few weeks. They've become a fun team to watch. Bryce Young is settling in. It doesn't change the fact that this is still one of the 3 worst defenses in the NFL. They're 31st in rush defense EPA. They just gave up 236 rushing yards to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. Now, I can see Philly coming out slowly like they do every single week. They're near the bottom of the league in first quarter scoring. But what happens every week, John, with the Eagles? Eventually, the dam breaks for the opposing defense. And most of those opposing defenses have been much, much better than the Carolina Panthers. I also think there's still motivation here for the Eagles. They're pushing for a potential 1 seed in the NFC. If Detroit, were to lose tonight to the Green Bay Packers, maybe that door becomes open. And there's also the Saquon Barkley history factor at play. I know Saquon himself may say he doesn't care about the rushing record, and I believe him on that, but he knows what pace he's on. The team is aware. Nick Sirianni is aware. If they have a chance to feed him, give him another massive game, put him well on pace to have a shot at the all-time record, I think that matters. It's a rare opportunity. It's not often, a running back, especially in today's day and age, that has that, kind of opportunity to break a big-time record like the one Eric Dickerson held. So I think the Eagles lean into that. I think this should be a huge Saquon Barkley game. We'll talk about that later in the prop section. And again, I have some respect for the Panthers. I think they can do enough offensively that this isn't just going to be a complete runaway. But man, that defense, they give up the most running yards per game, almost 170 yards on the ground per game. They've given up 18 touchdowns, 4.8 yards per carry. 3 teams have already racked up 200 plus rushing yards on the Panthers defense. They know it's coming. They won't be able to stop it. Eagles minus 12.5.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That was on my card as well. I mean, I just think that earlier in the week, you see that number. It's the biggest number on the board this week. And you think about, okay, the Panthers have definitely turned a bit of a corner lately, but I do think that the Eagles are making a strong case at being the best team in the NFC. I still think it's the Lions, but the Eagles certainly are healthier at this point, playing a little bit more convincing ball as we get into the latter parts of the season. They feel really built for it, and they're not as banged up as the Lions are. And you mentioned the trench advantage that the Eagles have on offense. I think defensively too, it's going to be, I mean, for as well as Bryce Young has played of late, the Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Zach Bond defense, like in his face all afternoon. The Panthers have partially benefited from being able to play a lot of these games at home recently. They kept things close at home last week and against the Chiefs. Now they got to go to Philly, to the Link. It could be bad. I mean, this is a different Carolina team than we saw in September, but they are still 1-4 against the number on the road this year. Big favorites haven't done as well of late. They started out on fire, but 0-3 the last couple of weeks. But I think we see a return to form here, and I think the Eagles cover this big number.
All right, John, your second game. I know you want to touch on the showdown between the Buccaneers and the Las Vegas Raiders. Yes,
shout out Super Bowl 37. And I'm envisioning a similar result here with the Buccaneers coming out on top. So I like the Bucs minus 6.5. I think this is just a good price point to get in for Tampa. If you look at the historical odds in our very nifty odds page, you can click on the individual games, see how the lines have moved. On the look ahead, going into Black Friday, it was Bucs minus 8. And obviously, the Raiders gave the Chiefs everything they could handle on Black Friday, and the Buccaneers, we're taken to toe-to-toe by the Panthers. I don't think that there's really 1 week of sample is enough to move this a 1.5 for me. I still value the Bucs as that 8-point favorite that they were on the look ahead. So I just think it's too much of a market correction, essentially, based on what we saw last week. We will need to keep an eye on what's up with Mike Evans. I'm hoping that it's just kind of like a veteran rest day. Like we're just getting you ready for Sunday more than anything, but still, probably not 100% with those hamstring and calf issues. But regardless, I mean, the Bucs showed they could run the ball a little bit last week as well. Bucky Irving coming on strong. So I think that they can win this one by a touchdown. Give me the Bucs.
Bucky Irving back at practice this week, by the way, was banged up at the end of that game against Carolina, but looks like he'll be good to go. I like the call here. Good notes on the line movement since the open. This is just a dead Raiders team. I think they found ways to keep games closer, perhaps, than they should throughout this season. They've covered twice against the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think Tampa Bay is a markedly better offense than Kansas City at this point. I don't even know what playing the Chiefs closely means at this point. I think that's a team and an offense that's valued a little bit differently than the record may indicate. So I like that one. Tampa Bay minus 6.5. I'm going to the Buffalo Bills for my second pick. We're taking the Bills as road favorites here. And, On paper, this is a tough travel spot for Buffalo, going cross country, played in prime time at home last week. But teams that travel from Eastern time to Pacific time are 21-12-1 against the spread over the last 2 seasons in that second game. Josh Allen has cleaned up, against these mediocre to bad teams in his career, 29-4 straight up against sub 500 teams. In his NFL career, he's winning those games by over 13 points per game. Matthew Stafford really struggled as a dog throughout his career, 31-80 straight up as an underdog. I think the Bills have a ton of advantages here. The Rams' run defense, every now and then it shows up, but on balance has really struggled. Alvin Kamara got after them for over 100 yards last week. The Bills are 5th in the NFL in rushing EPA. They've scored at least 30 points now in 6 straight games. The Rams have hit 30 points once this year, and that was in an overtime game. It's just been a hit or miss offense. It's an offense that was shut out in the first half last week against New Orleans. Ended up needing to score 3 touchdowns on 4 second half possessions. Defense was really struggling to get off the field. I know, motivationally, they're you could make an argument that there's an edge for the Rams. They really need this game to hang around in the division, but the Bills, they're just waiting for KC to slip up again and potentially chase that 1 seed in the AFC. So I don't see this as really a letdown spot for Buffalo. I think we're getting a good number. I think the Bills are just a markedly better team than the LA Rams, who've not impressed me, even in their recent wins.
Yeah, I think just zooming out a little bit, it's starting to feel a little bit like the Bills year. You have these NFC teams that are going to be really tough when they meet up in February. But as far as AFC picks are concerned, and I know it's scary to bet against Patrick Mahomes in January, but Josh Allen threw a touchdown to himself. I don't know. There's something different going on here. I locked in the Bills to win the Super Bowl on my way out of town earlier this week in DC, 5-1. I will take that. I will continue to chase that as we get closer to the postseason. The Rams, they're a fine NFC team. Like they're wild card or divisional contenders, but everyone is in that division. Bills are literally like one of the 3 best teams, if not the best team. I think the road thing, not an issue for them this week. I like that call.
All right, you got one more game, John. I know you like the Eagles as well this week against Carolina, so feel free to add to anything I said, or if you want to go in a different direction, the floor is yours.
I'm going to take us to Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And I think I like the Steelers -6.5. So I got all big faves on my card this week.
What could go wrong?
I'm good with that. No, absolutely nothing. It'll be totally fine. Miami -5.5 was also a consideration because speaking of dead teams, the Jets are dead, and I'm not too worried about the Dolphins if they're not playing in the snow. But Steelers, I think that there's understandable concern about the offense coming back to earth a little bit this week, and we'll get to that a little bit in the props. I do think that is fair to expect. They're not going to score 40 again unless Jameis has something to do with it. But, the Browns, they got the win over the Steelers that first time. Funky conditions there. It's going to be a clear, kind of warm day for Pittsburgh this time of year on Sunday, so that's not going to be a factor. I think that we might see the Steelers kind of attack more on the ground, keep this more on the ground in this one. I like them to just kind of mush Cleveland over the course of 60 minutes here and get the win by at least a touchdown.
I think there's a pretty good chance the Steelers will not go with the leave Jerry Jeudy wide open on every play approach that the Denver Broncos controversially employed last week. I mean, it was eye-opening, the degree to which, not only Jameis was able to make some tight window throws, also throw 2.5 pick sixes, but the amount of wide open receivers, especially early in that game, I don't think those big plays are necessarily going to be available against Pittsburgh. I think this is kind of a mini revenge spot. These teams played just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, somewhat of a fluky game in the snow, but I think Pittsburgh is ready to avenge that. So I like that one. I actually like the over 43.5 in that game as well. I mean, the Browns cannot run the ball. Like you said, it's not always going to look like it did against the Broncos on Monday night, where it's just big play after big play. But Jameis is going to have to throw the ball 35, maybe 40 plus times, as long as the time of possession is there. Like, they have no other option. This team cannot run. They're not going to be able to run on Pittsburgh. It's kind of become a Jameis raid offense, for better or for worse. And even if he's not throwing 3 or 4 touchdowns, he might throw 1 or 2 pick sixes that result in points for the other team. So my favorite play there would be the over. You're riding Pittsburgh -6.5. For my last play, John, I'm going to a total. And we're getting back on the under train this week. We're looking at Arizona, Seattle under 44.5. Total's actually down 1.5 from where it opened. I still think 44.5 is just fine. At DraftKings right now, 49% of the bets are on the under, 93% of the money coming in on the under. So I think that pushes me even more in favor of this. I will say I do lean Cardinals to win and cover the 2.5. I've seen a lot of money coming in on Arizona the last couple of days. Kind of a bad travel spot for Seattle. They played at home in week 12. They had to go cross country to New York last week. Now you're going back to the West Coast to play another consecutive road game. So I think this could be a trip up spot for Seattle, which they continue to win games, but it is so unconvincing. They had no business winning that game last week against the Jets. 3 fumbled kickoffs. They went out on downs at the 1 yard line. They had 7 plays in a row inside the 4 and couldn't punch it in. Only the Jets find a way to lose a game like that. So I don't really feel like Seattle is necessarily peaking right now. DK Metcalf is banged up. Kenneth Walker is banged up. I certainly don't think that helps the point scoring potential for this Seattle team. And they can't really run the ball. And both of these teams really struggled to generate big plays, especially Arizona on a week-to-week basis. The Cardinals had 1 play of more than 20 yards last week. Like they just do not hit big plays through the air. They tend to have long drives. They tend to take time off the clock. They've also struggled in the red zone. They were 1 of 6 in the red zone last week. Seattle, a couple more notes here. I know I'm just spitting information at you, but Seattle's gone over this number in 2 of the last 5 games. In one of those, they got a defensive score that essentially pushed it over. The other was an over against the Rams, and it only went over because it went to overtime. So I see this being a game that could play out pretty similarly to when we saw this matchup in Seattle 2 weeks ago. I don't know if it's a 16-6 game necessarily, but I think it's going to be a race to 20 type of situation. The Arizona defense has really improved as the season goes along. They've got 10 sacks over the last 2 weeks. So I think they make life difficult on Geno Smith. We're going under 44.5 in Cardinals Seahawks.
Pretty amazing what this total looks like compared to, when they met just a couple weeks ago. But before that 16-6 game that ruined all my DFS action on that slate. I'm not bitter, but I think it was 49, 50, something like that. And now it's oh yeah, we forgot that neither of these teams can score and they can defend pretty well.
Yeah. And, Seattle got a defensive touchdown in that game as well. So it could have been even more lower scoring. All right, those are our 6 picks for the week. We'll lock those in. John, let's get to the prop market. What are you looking at this week?
All right, I'm going to lead us off. This dovetails with our Philly discussion earlier. I'm going to go with Saquon Barkley to score 2 or more touchdowns. It's only 2-1 at BetMGM, and those are the best odds out there. I mean, there's others where it's plus 180, but we're doing it. I just think that there's no way that Carolina stops them. Really, we're just going to need to have the bad Jalen Hurts luck with tush pushes. But even still, who's to say that the Eagles aren't putting up 4+ touchdowns on Sunday? I like Russell Wilson under 231 passing yards. I think that's going to be looked at as the layup of the week, especially in light of the way that Russ has played the last 2 games, 270 yards. Couple weeks ago in the snow, and then however much he threw for last week against the Bengals. I think that comes back to earth a little bit, and for most of the season he's been under that. So minus 114 at FanDuel, I'll go with that. I like Tyreek Hill over 60.5 receiving yards. I just think that this is Miami offense to buy in on this week, especially against the Jets. And then I think we finally see it happen. Give me a Trey McBride anytime touchdown. The man just gets too many targets, too many catches, too many yards. The correction is coming eventually. He's going to reward his fantasy investors. He's going to reward his prop investors this week. It's 2-1 at DraftKings just for 1 score. It's going to happen. And then sticking with the tight ends, I like Njoku for the price. Plus 230 at FanDuel. I think that, again, this is a funky game, funky matchup, and I think it won't be as zany as this Browns game last week. But I do think that Njoku, there's a pretty obvious connection that he has going on with Jameis, and I think that attacking the safeties is probably the best way of getting at this Steelers secondary. So give me Njoku plus 230.
Not going to fight you on a guy who had 17 targets last week from Jameis Winston, 31 targets over his last 3 games for Njoku. I'm really in the mud with some of these props this week, John. Aiden O'Connell over 1.5 passing touchdowns plus 125. I think we're getting a good number there. I like the Raiders to make this a somewhat competitive game. Every week they end up putting up points, especially early on. They can make games a little more dicey than you would think. And I think this Tampa Bay defense still rates really poorly. The offense has obviously picked things up and bailed them out, but it should be pretty exploitable. Don't expect Vegas to be able to run the ball whatsoever. I like Will Levis over 1.5 passing touchdowns as well. Plus 175 going up against by far the worst secondary in football in the Jacksonville Jaguars, a Jaguars team that will be starting Mac Jones. Not that he plays defense, but just from a general morale standpoint, I don't think that's a good thing. Again, pretty wild price here for Will Levis, plus 175. In that same game, Evan Ingram over 43.5 receiving yards. Mac Jones is kind of a safety valve artist, a safety valve merchant, if you will, at this point. And he has heavily targeted the tight ends in every game that he's played for the Jags this season. So good number here on Ingram at 43.5. Chase Brown over 26.5 receiving yards against the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas dead last in the NFL in yards per target allowed to running backs by a big margin. You mentioned Saquon Barkley. I mean, over 113.5 rushing yards. Come on. This is way too low. Over 113.5. We're taking that. K. Dotton, anytime touchdown in that Tampa Las Vegas game, plus 155. Raiders are a bottom 5 defense against tight ends this season. And the sicko prop of the week, I'm so excited for Kendre Miller to get back in the mix for the New Orleans Saints. So assuming he's activated, Kendre Miller, anytime touchdown, plus 320. Bad Giants defense, a defense that just lost Dexter Lawrence. I think it's a Saints team that's going to be very, very run heavy. I think Kendre Miller, steps in, sees carries right away. Darren Rizzi's been excited about using him. He never should have been on IR in the first place. And it's a team that's missing Taysom Hill, and obviously Kendre Miller is not going to just play the Taysom Hill role, but there will be carries, there will be receptions, there will be snaps available for him behind Alvin Kamara.